what we're experiencing being dismantled right now was put in motion by the progressive era. Like what Trump is breaking apart was solidified by FDR, but it was put in motion by the progressive era, by the academics, the experts, the rule of the experts kind of thing in government, in the U.S. government. And I don't know what's going to happen in the future, but with America withdrawing its soft power from Europe, I'm wondering how, if Europe's going to be able to correct itself from certain aspects of the progressive era that you guys are experiencing, with massive immigration, multiculturalism, left-wing media that apparently is mostly funded by us. So
with Trump 2.0, it's now pretty apparent that we, Europe and Britain, particularly Britain, are just way behind the curve now.
Well, you guys have a direction to go in, I guess.
Yeah.
It's possible, maybe.
Yeah. And I'll take that. Well, let's see. Hopefully, maybe if Le Pen can get in France, AfD can get in Germany, if we can get Reform or even someone more right than them, fingers crossed. Hopefully Trump, and if it's sort of advanced presidency after that, hopefully they can sort of show us something to aim towards.
Yeah.
I'm hoping,
Is Reform just kind of the conservative coalition? Do you think that are they particularly strong? I was just at this ARC conference, which was kind of a big tent, conservative, classical liberal-ish, umbrella. And there wasn't anybody making really strong statements. There was no real leadership there. There was a couple of kooky ideas, and kind of Farage was there. He was interviewed by Jordan Peterson, but he was very political on what he would say and what he wouldn't say. So I'm wondering if you guys have any blustery Trump-ish, king-like personalities that might...
Not really. There are parties that are ever so slightly more conservative or right-leaning than Reform. There's like the English Democrats, there's UKIP, there's the Homeland Party. There are some, but they're sort of small outfits.
Yeah.
But I don't know if you're aware of my history with Reform.
Oh no.
So I might not be the best person in the world to ask, because I'm going to have to give you quite a personal take on it. But for me, they're not anywhere near strong enough. But that's just my take. They are still going to be way better than a Starmer government.
Yeah,
of course they are.
Yeah.
But for me, they're not strong. Like you say, then some people in the party are right. Like Rupert Lowe is good, but I don't think, personally, I don't think Nigel Farage and Richard Tice's leadership is strong enough, or their rhetoric is strong enough. For example, Nigel was asked very specifically about remigration,
which is deportation.
Yeah.
Why did they invent a new word for that? Maybe it's an older word.
It's not a new word.
Okay.
It's just another word for the same thing.
Yeah.
And he essentially just said, no, we can't do that. It's politically impossible.
Huh.
And
who knows what's politically possible and impossible?
Yeah. No, historically, the forced mass movements of people is very, very common. In fact, happens all the time. Pakistan deported nearly all their Afghans very recently. Russia deported loads and loads of Chechens recently. It's not completely weird or odd.
Yeah.
Just because the Nazis deported lots of people, what they considered undesirable people during the war, it means it's completely evil and should never ever be attempted ever again. No. If there's a big population in your country who are subversive or even destroying the fabric of your society, you should be able to deport them. But and so UKIP and Homeland will talk about that sort of thing. AfD talk about it. Le Pen talk about it. But for Nigel Farage at Reform, apparently it's impossible.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know if you know, but I was briefly selected to stand for them in Parliament and then deselected because they then discovered something I'd written about remigration, and it was too strong. It was too spicy for them.
Yeah.
So for me, Reform isn't strong enough, but it is, of course, I won't deny, it is still a step in the right direction.
Yeah.
I'm not denying that.
Yeah.
It's still going to be way better than Lib Dem or even a Conservative government under Badenoch or anything. But anyway, hopefully Trump will show us the way.
Well, because
Trump's going to be deporting loads of people, right?
Well, we'll see. I mean, some people are saying it's not happening quick enough, but who knows what needs to be ramped up. But when you talk about incrementalism, it always favors the left. It always favors entropy. It never favors order. Order needs to be established, like making a movie by committee. Like it's just going to fall apart in the end. You need a strong central authority that creates order. And then everybody else can live within that order. I don't see like an incrementalism, like we're going to get a little bit more right now, and then we're going to get a little bit more right later, and then we're going to get even righter further on down the line, other than maybe the Overton window being shifted a little bit, maybe the specter of Hitler kind of becoming more particular to a part of history that is no longer governing the minds and the hearts of people in the present that live in this reality. That might free up people to make more common sense decisions, even if the common sense isn't necessarily aligned with something a little bit more strong, like deporting or re-migrating people who've been here, 10 years, 20 years, a generation, and then figuring out where to cut off that line.
Yeah. I mean, you talk about the Overton window. I mean, you mentioned just before we started that maybe you'd like to have a conversation with Academic Asian, because you spoke to him before on your channel.
Yeah.
It was a very interesting conversation, actually. But he talked about, or coined the phrase of the boomer truth regime, another way perhaps of saying the post-war consensus. The idea that the Overton window, if it shifts at all, is always to the left. And that there will have to be some sort of realigning of that at some point.
Yeah.
Is that can't go on forever.
Yeah.
If that is left to go on forever, you end up without a country.
Yeah.
You end up with a massive welfare system and open borders.
Yeah.
Which very, very quickly leads to the destruction of your country.
Yeah.
And that people, it seems, the majority of people don't want that.
You don't think that, well, that's the big question. Where is the political will? Where's the democratic, insofar as democracy is viable, where's the democratic will to make England again, or make Britain English again? Maybe that was something was going around on Twitter about what defines an Englishman and what defines a Britishman, or one of British persuasion.
Right. Yeah. I mean, they're all very interesting and complicated things. Well, I mean, if you look at Reform, they seem to be, well, in some polls, they are leading. So according to some polls, they are the most popular party. And although they're still weak on remigration, as far as I'm concerned, they are at least patriotic light, at least. Right? A lot of them talk about how you shouldn't be ashamed to be British or English. So this sort of, the stripe of progressivism, which sees any type of patriotism or nationalism as just pure evil, they're not that, right? At least. So because the argument a lot of people have made is that no, most people do want their country to be flooded by foreigners. Just look at how they've voted over the last 30 or 40 years. Well, that doesn't make sense on a couple of levels. Least of all is that most governments, ever since the 60s, certainly since the 70s, have said they won't do it, and then they go back on that and do it anyway. Right? Certainly in the last 20 years.
Same with Canada. The massive immigration in Canada was not ever voted for.
No one asked for that.
Yeah, nobody ever asked for that.
We weren't asked.
And well, I wonder, with the dying of the boomer truth regime, with the dying of the post-war consensus, something has to come in and replace it. There has to be an understanding, a visceral understanding of what is an Englishman, what is the British identity. And if you in America, American identity has been formed in the wake of wars, our Revolutionary War, our Civil War, and then World War II is like these big concrescences of identity. After World War II, we are basically the leaders of the free world. We are the strongest economy. We're really proud. We have this thing called the American dream. And our job is to make sure that the world runs correctly and spends US dollars doing so. With the dismantling of the deep state and the Trumpist kind of, he's being pretty overt. He's quoting Napoleon now. They tweeted out a picture with him with a crown on his head. In absent of war, we still need some sort of strong identity. I don't know what we're talking about here today, but I would really like to hear what you think about British identity post World War II and where that might lead you guys now. Like, what does it mean to be British? I was just walking down Manchester Street, and I think your channel's going to be putting out a little documentary on the ground here where you guys do this show, which is rather right-leaning. But if you walk around the corner here, there's this place that has definitely been built by British people, and it's older buildings, but it's completely staffed or lived in by Pakistanis, I guess.
Yeah, so,
The
or
church is a
Indians.
mosque. Like what I love to do when I go to Europe is go to visit the church. I'm like, oh, there's a church. It's a mosque. So I don't know if I'd even be allowed in there. But like where you would suppose there was a tobacco shop is now a vape shop, and all the advertisements are showing this identity that isn't of this land. So I'm wondering, like, with that around the corner, how does that affect the psyche of people growing up here? And what is it? What is the story of what it is to be a British person? I don't even know.
When you talk about the psyche, it's extremely demoralizing,
Yeah,
and alien. And we were never asked for it. No one wanted that. In fact, we've explicitly said we don't want it ever since the 1960s. Yeah, it's just a foreign enclave. Yeah, and it's nearly every town and city in the whole country.
really.
Yeah.
When we flew here, we flew into Heathrow, and we took the tube underground, and then we popped up, and the only thing I saw of London was just indistinguishable from Chicago. Just this multi-ethnic kind of rundown place with no particularity to it. Just a bunch of, there's kind of some older buildings, but most of it is just this kind of rundown. And I really have felt the demoralization of this place. Nobody really cares to pick up the trash. Nobody really cares to renovate, but they'll build something new, and that newness is like indescript, globalist. Everything is like an airport that is new here. Everything old is kind of unkempt a little bit.
Well,
maybe I'm being too strong, and I don't want to offend you.
The thing about of course not. No. The thing about that, like when you see we see footage of somewhere like San Francisco being completely unkempt.
Yeah.
Well, it's not been that way all that long. But if you go back 10, 15 years, it never used to be the case. Why is it suddenly now? It's a great question. I mean, one of the reasons in Britain, at least, is that the councils often are run by the same foreign people, and they don't seem to care, or they mismanage the budget terribly. I saw a clip just on Twitter the other day. It was like Chinatown in London in like the year 2005 and now. And one is the way it always used to be, i.e. well kept and clean and tidy. And now in 2025, it just looks like something from San Francisco, just a complete dump.
It's so hard to have pride in your country when your country's trashy. That shows a disrespect towards your country when it's trashy. So
and loads of shops boarded up.
Yeah.
And looking broken down, and it hasn't been that way very long.
Yeah.
When I was a child, or even when I was in my 20s, that wasn't really the case. So all this is happening recently, I would say.
I met Edward Dutton at this conference I was at, and he said, I'm okay with change happening in my lifetime, but over half a decade, that's way too much.
Yeah. But when you talked of sort of the English identity, I always think that's the sort of question that usually it just leads down the road of subversion. Usually, if you're a born and bred British person, you don't even need to ask the question. You've got more than 1,000 years of glorious tradition to look back upon, right? It's only since the war, World War II, I mean, where there's ever been a question, right? We used to have, and again, I'm talking in the first half of the 20th century or whatever, used to have an extremely strong sense of identity. Extremely strong. It seemed unassailable, you would have thought, if you'd asked someone pre-1914 what it means to be an Englishman, what it means to be British. They probably would have snorted with derision at the very question.
But now, they exuded Britishness, like in how they comported themselves.
But now, of course, there's a million and one things you could point to. But now, of course, ever since, well, perhaps more since the 60s and the 70s, where there's a type of almost a civilizational level of a falling confidence, where now questions like that creep in, and if you've got a whole tranche of fifth columnists that are constantly trying to undermine you as well, then suddenly the question seems a poignant one. Well, I don't even think it is. I don't really need to answer the question.
Okay.
It's self-evident what is, who is and who isn't an Englishman, what is and what isn't British. It's not even really a question to me. But then, subversives do just endlessly say that. They'll go further and say that you have no heritage, you have no culture. We talked to just before we came on here about Westminster Abbey.
Mm-hmm.
Don't tell me there's no culture. Don't
Yeah.
tell me we haven't got any history or heritage. Absolute disgusting nonsense. But as you say, for going forward, for younger people, for like the Zoomer generations or whatever, it has become an actual question. And I mean, what a crying shame that it even needs to be addressed.
If you would like to see the full version of this premium video, please head over to lotuseaters.com and subscribe to gain full access to all of our premium content.